Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the February 21 edition of SM Advanced. I've left the mutes up, didn't I? Of course. And once again, we've re-engineered the workflow. So a slightly different look and feel for those that have got sharp eyes. We might get into that a little bit later on because sometimes the workflow is of interest. My name's Don Robinson. You're tuned to SM Advanced Room, your monthly roundup. No hat, Mark. I can see you in the chat room. And hello, Kurum. Your monthly roundup of what's hot, what's not, what's interesting in and around the business and technology of streaming. I am, as always, joined by my erstwhile co-hosts Mark, Eric, and Tim. And two guests who we'll come to in a second. Tim, are you out there?
I am, Dom. How are you doing?
Not bad. Let me just remove the spotlight so we can see your much more cleanly shaved face than mine. What's your month been like? What have you been up to? Oh, he's gone. Look at that. No, he's back again. There we go.
Oh, and I'm back.
There we go.
Just to give you a quick overview of what I've been working on. Eric and I have been working on State of Streaming, the third edition in less than a year. We'll actually be presenting the results from that at Streaming Media Connect on February 16th. That's been actually quite interesting. Eric was joking with me that I should use my GameStop earnings to fly us all in somewhere, but alas, I only had AMC, so mine didn't go stratospheric. It only went halfway up to the stratosphere. I'm going to hold on to that because I do think theater will come back eventually, just like meetings will come back eventually. But that's been my primary focus, has been State of Streaming, and then we've got another survey that'll be rolling out here probably the middle of next week.
Eric, so I heard about this. Tim hadn't said, well, I heard about this game. Was it GameStop thing? I've heard mention of it, but I haven't actually followed what it is. What's going on there?
GME is the stock ticker for a company here in the States that basically sells you used games, or in some cases, new games and consoles.
Oh, yes.
They're little, we'd call them strip mall, little small shops. The stock has been doing very, very poorly. Retail as a whole has been doing very poorly because of COVID. But a group on Reddit decided that it was nostalgic enough, and so they started funding a number of stocks. They were looking to sort of fight off hedge funds who were trying to short the stocks and push the price down. So they picked GameStop. It's nostalgic. They picked AMC, which is the theater chain, of course, owns Odeon. Picked Koss headphones, and I think American Airlines, and literally just in some instances, stocks went from $6 to $600 a share.
Oh, nice.
And then, of course, fell back almost as rapidly. But in the meantime, the hedge funds who had shorted had to sell their positions, and there's calculations of $3.5 to $4 billion of loss for the large hedge funds, and equivalent gains for small retail investors. It's been enough that enough news here that, alongside the impeachment and all the other things that will be going on in the next few weeks, there are going to be committee hearings in the House of Representatives about whether the Wall Street as a whole is actually trying to keep retail investors like the Reddit kids and 20s and 30-year-olds from making money. So, yeah. If you had GameStop at $6 and sold it at $500, you're probably trying to figure out how to fly to Dubai, just like half the influencers out of the UK who've gotten stuck out there because all the flights were canceled.
Excellent. Well, my little flutter on Bitcoin over Christmas doubled my money, which wasn't bad, but that's the best I've done. 30 quid became 60 quid, and then I ran away because I always lose money on those things.
There's a really cool story that a young boy in St. Louis here in the U.S. was given a bit of Bitcoin by his mother for Kwanzaa, and it rose so rapidly that he took the $30, I think it was, and it turned into $3,200. So he sold it here recently, and he's using it to get some stuff for his mom, as well as, keep some stuff for savings for education ongoing. It was just a really cool story.
That was actually the GameStop stock. That wasn't Bitcoin.
Oh, was it? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So she had given it to him basically, if I remember, Eric, to sort of help him understand the investing part of Kwanzaa.
Right. And then, of course, has to backtrack and say, this isn't usually how it works.
Yeah, I did the same thing with Disney stock for some young relatives. That was a bad choice.
Mm-hmm.
Bad choice.
On the flip side, I mean, if you think about it, Roku is racing up too. I had Roku last year around $96, and it's now close to Netflix at this point, closing in on 450. Eric, you mentioned that this isn't the way it usually happens. Do you remember Rebecca Black, who did that song Friday? Her mother paid $1,500 for her to do the music video, which absolutely blew up. And, again, it was we'll teach you that it doesn't work this way, and magically it did.
Right.
So, all right. So what have you been doing?
I have been working on Streaming Media Connect, which, as Tim mentioned, will kick off with he and I and our partner, who will be revealed once the survey actually closes next Monday. We're kicking that off on February 16th with 5 panel discussions a day that week. And then the following week will be a number of 3-hour workshops. There's some that are free, put on by some of our sponsors, and some that are $200. Jan Ozer and Robert Reinhardt, Sean Lamb will be doing those. At our in-person shows, we typically have these 3-hour workshops, and they're considerably more than $200, I believe. So people should check those out if they are interested. And then we have also, along with everyone else who had an event planned for later this spring, we are moving Streaming Media East, which was going to be in Boston, first week of June. We're moving that to May, and it will be online once again. And we are close to doubling the number of panel sessions and presentations that we're going to have then. We were talking before we went live about whether or not people have really gotten virtual event fatigue. And I know Dom never gets virtual event fatigue. He's like Malcolm McDowell in Clockwork Orange with the toothpicks in his eyes.
I'll tell you something in a minute, actually.
But we have found that registrations for Streaming Media Connect in February are tracking just as the ones did for the previous 2. The question, of course, will be what actually happens the day of the event or the days of the event. Are people actually showing up? Because, it's easy for all of us. Just like if you go to NAB and you get invited to a bunch of parties, you select yes to all the invites, right? And then you decide which ones you're going to go to. But we've had really good success so far. And for this one in February, we've got, the usual lineup of excellent speakers from Disney, HBO, Netflix, CBS, Warner Media. So it'll be another great event. Other than that, working on wrapping up the Streaming Media Industry Sourcebook, which will come out at the beginning of or the second week of March. And figuring out some longer term plans for streaming media. I'd ask Tim to take it away again, but Tim has taken it away.
No, Tim's nipped off to get an Ethernet cable. There he is. He's back. He did message me to say, need an Ethernet cable. So
yeah, I rearranged the office, and so I realized my Wi-Fi is a little further than it normally is. So I wanted to just tap into the physical fiber. So yeah, Eric, you mentioned right at the end there, looking at sort of streaming media going forward. I think you mentioned before we went on air the rolling realization that people aren't getting together. The same is true, I think, across the streaming industry, the rolling realization that we all are working from home for an extended period of time, and perhaps some of the marketing ideas that people had that were sort of pushed off to the end of 2020. Now the question is, do we implement those, or do we shift the way that we do marketing and that kind of thing going forward? Have you seen, just from a overall marketing standpoint in the industry, that companies are rethinking the way they do things through budget cycles for, say for 2021?
I think the budget cycles have remained just about the same, at least according to our publisher, Joel. In terms of reallocating dollars to other forms of marketing, one of the things that inspired us to go bigger for Streaming Media East in terms of the number of panels that we're offering is that, Joel, our publisher, had to turn people away from sponsoring sessions at this February Connect because there was so much interest. So from a marketing standpoint, I think virtual events are still very appealing, and will continue to be so, for at least the first half, maybe 2/3 of 2021.
Mark, what about you out on the West Coast?
What have I been up to? A lot of the same. We're doing a lot of interesting virtualized events, some more successful than others in terms of the concept. We've done, a couple music events this past month. One of which was a drive-in concert where everyone remained in their cars and honked instead of clapping. It was an interesting experience. We're doing virtual events, big and small. We worked on Dolby's entry into the CES week. They created a second Dolby Summit where they showed off everything in terms of vision and Atmos in a pretty well crafted tight address that we created for them. And I think that was quite successful in terms of the interactivity and that sort of thing. We've also done some corporate events, virtual events on existing virtual event platforms, and those are as successul as they have been. I think they're more successful these days because people are just desperate to connect and desperate to interact, and so a lot of the kind of gimmicky bells and whistles that you see, on those platforms are more readily accepted than they would be otherwise. So it'll be interesting to see what happens post-COVID with some of these platforms like, Visibo and B Fairs and B Summits and all those guys. So, but yeah, we've been doing a lot of different stuff, all virtual.
Got it. All right, we'll go ahead and start with our guests. And Vanessa, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your time in the industry.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, good. Just checking. Yeah, great to be here. So first of all, thank you very much, Tim, Dom, Eric, and Mark, and letting me join you today. I've been around for a while, if you will. I started off in content, launching channels actually in Asia Pacific for ESPN and Turner and so on. And then around 2000, I went over to the technology side around mobile, and then have been in more the enabling side of video and TV, and most recently in streaming. And then I joined a month ago, almost today, to Insight TV. And I don't know if anyone knows them, but we are, reality, non-scripted, formatted type content producer. We're also a distributor. We have our own linear and digital channels and social channels. And it gives us a sort of global reach, if you will, of around 315 million households, which is a number that blew me away when I started, because I sort of, I didn't realize that it was that far. But I'm really enjoying being back on the content side. I still love the tech. So we actually have one of the world's biggest libraries of high definition content for this audience, which may not be huge, but it was actually one of the key foundations of the company, actually, around the UHD and 4K stuff. So yeah, I'm getting my feet under the table and having some fun with it.
Very good. And then last but not least, is it Loki? Is that how you...
Yeah, Loki works.
All right, awesome. Well, tell me how you would say it, because that's... So
the Danish pronunciation would be Loke, but that's Loki certainly also works. So my background is I started working for a company called Extreme about 10 years ago, selling online video platforms. Similar to what you can see from MTX or Brightcove or something like that. I've been there doing multiple different roles, mostly working on programming, starting with programming and then moving over to looking a little bit more at DRM and streaming technology and adapting more of that space. Then, it's about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago, I switched from the sort of vendor side to the other side. switched to well, actually Blockbuster in Denmark, which is owned by Danish telco. Just the brand is in the Nordics, but it's no longer the physical stores. It's not the same company anymore. Worked there for a few years, trying to build a video service to rent movies online, of course. And then about 2 years ago, switched to the Danish broadcaster called TV2, which is the largest commercial broadcaster in Denmark. Working as a solution architect within streaming and player technology, trying to make sure that our video gets delivered to all the users, even when we have popular events and other things that might trip that up.
It's interesting you mentioned Blockbuster. Those of us, I think I know Dom was in the industry. Mark was probably in the industry at that point. Enron, which was a company here in the States, had tried to convince Blockbuster in the 1999-2000 timeframe to shift to online delivery of videos. And of course, at that point, not only were there the licensing issues about how you would deliver it, but there were the technical issues. And so that it's fascinating to hear you say that the brand that was there in the Nordic countries still had maintained popularity from that standpoint. So,
yeah, I think it was an easy way to have a service where it was obvious what you were getting. Anybody who's familiar with the stores know, okay, it's video rental. That's what it is. You don't really have to explain the product when you slip that label on it, which I think was useful.
And that's even been true here stateside with Redbox, which is it's the kiosk that you go to and you pull a DVD out of. They tried, somewhat successfully to try to move over to the on-demand side. AMC now, we're seeing, of course, is trying to move to on-demand because people can't go to the theaters and like that. So you're right, those brand names, people know what those brand names stand for. They stand for, I'm going to watch quality content, and therefore it makes perfect sense. So very good. Dom, I'm going to have you actually take some of the emceeing because my connection's still a bit unstable. Do you want to start off with one of the questions that we had here on the list?
Yeah, let's have a skim up. So, Vanessa, we had a little bit of a preamble talk, and I'm just going to pick off the top of the list here. So, you were talking about the rise of digital TV and streaming events and bringing people together. I mean, we kind of started to touch on that a minute ago with Eric and Tim's conversation, and I think there's transformative things happening. In fact, I've just been ranting on a Facebook post for the first time in 3 months. I went on Facebook and got seduced into having a little rant about a new license which is coming out for music distribution, which I think is directly related to this. And I think there's some really exciting things gradually being forced to happen in industries which until now have always seen the internet as either a threat or a sort of inferior cousin. And they've been thrust into having to pay their dues to our industry and respect us for a bit and use us to keep their own businesses together. And I think, we can beat up on the music industry later. But in your experience, how are you finding the overall people around you, the businesses that you're working with and so on? How are they dealing with this transition to a nearly all streaming environment at the moment for their workspace?
Yeah, it's such a huge topic, isn't it? It's like, I think you mentioned, we talked about this a little bit earlier, the craving for connection. The other thing that, we can look at it, there's actually content companies, streamers and broadcasters alike trying to create opportunities for people to connect together but apart, or together at home, whichever hashtag you were using. And that's actually spurred a lot of this innovation, right? And there's nothing like a pandemic to make that kind of really come together. So push people, I think, a little faster than they would have anticipated, from marketing through to actually rethinking their approach. I know a company called Broadway HD had a really interesting case for, it's probably well known, but they partnered up with a lot of the theatres who, of course, can't open, and people have got subscriptions. And so the deal they did and continue to do in both the US and the UK, as far as I know, those markets only at the moment, but big theatre land type countries, that they said, okay, we'll give our streaming Broadway HD service for free to your members, and at the same time, you know, throw us your content. And of course, that was probably done with a view that, you know, this pandemic will be over in 6 months. And of course, this is going on. And I think, so there's been this sort of, I've certainly felt it from my marketing roles, but also in the space I'm in and generally, right? And personally, you think, okay, this is going to be over soon. So I don't mind trying a few things and take it seriously. But now it's actually becoming serious, and it is becoming, we have to make it profitable. We have to make it work for our business. And so from a programming point of view, you know, whether it's live streaming a concert that we're doing on Saturday, plug for David Guetta out of Dubai, if you're a David Guetta fan. But I mean, awesome stuff that can, you know, dance around your living room, let's do this together kind of thing, through to repackaging programming to create events, of course, which actually program marketers have been doing for years. Let's look at Shark Week and Discovery, which I love. It's my favorite package of marketing, but it's still a fresh Shark Week every week. I'm not saying that's the same, but you know, this is sort of, people are becoming a little more familiar, and you know, watch together type of technologies are really interesting. I'm sure you know, you can talk to those on a more technical level, but from a marketing perspective, that makes it really interesting to do that. I mean, that's the content side. What I'm seeing on the B2B and the marketing side, it's experimenting. You know, we've got to just try stuff. So one of the things that I miss most is this serendipity, right? The chance to bump into people, to have a chat, to do what we're doing here, which is one of the reasons why I thought it was great to come along and just have a chat.
We started a trend 2 years before the pandemic, I'm afraid.
You did, it's great. So I'm working with Chris Buff, you probably know him, and Janet Gadot on a series of media meet and greet events. And these have got no other agenda than just creating serendipity. And it's actually using a platform that's really was made for VC funding. So like these timed pitch sessions, and the timer clicks away and then you go out. So you can do those one-on-one meetings, but we have these sort of conversation type chat rooms where people can come in and come and go. I was just experimenting, trying stuff. And I think, you know, the level caliber of the events that Eric's and the team are putting on, and, you know, that we're seeing big brands putting on their own events, and they all have a place. And I think there's so many different technology platforms as well involved for people using it. You know, we complain about Zoom or Teams or whatever, love them as we do, but none of them are perfect. And so it's very hard to have an event, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong here, that can do the really high quality video conference thing, have some chat, sure, but actually create that serendipity stuff. I'm still missing a platform that can really replace it. And I don't think it is replacing. I think it's part of the future. It's part of the way we're going to be connecting moving forward.
Yeah, we you know, way back when we decided to do our first Streaming Media Connect, we, with Dom's help, and I mean, Dom looked at every level of platform all the way up to, you know, virtual worlds with avatars. And, you know, we ultimately decided on Zoom just because compared to any other platform out there, the video and audio is as good as it gets. Now, it doesn't have all of these other functions to offer that serendipity that you're talking about, and people are missing that. In fact, I was having a conversation with one of my writers yesterday, bemoaning the fact that our events don't have that, and that's because that, well, number one, we're trying to do them as cheaply as possible so that we can generate some revenue, because unlike some other events in the industry, these are not loss leaders for us. But yeah, it's certainly missing, and I know, you know, there are plenty of platforms out there that allow it, but the complexities that brings to both the tech and the staffing side of things to make them run smoothly is just more than we can do. So we're still really focusing on the content, but it's definitely getting to the point where we're getting more asks for something else.
And Vanessa, we've actually had this conversation a couple times on SMAFs.
Oh, Tim's Ethernet just wigged out there. I heard it go, but yeah, we as Tim was saying, we have often talked about this, and I think the you know, the serendipity. The problem with in my opinion, the problem with a lot of the video formats is these attempts to create serendipity, that everyone's gone a bit hell for leather with all the features that you can add. And when you add one of the things, I don't know if you know, if you're aware, Vanessa, but I program and run the Content Delivery Summit specifically for Eric.
Oh, right.
And one of my conditions for doing it is that we don't do breakout rooms, which sounds counterintuitive because I'm really, strongly of the shared opinion that we need serendipity in the industry. But I've also worked with streaming for 25 years, and you spend so much effort trying to get someone to click a URL, and it seems so counterintuitive at the point you've got them click through to watch that stream to then say, now go somewhere else.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And we have the benefit that because we're not tied to having to be in a facility between two dates because of airline tickets and other commitments, we've actually unlocked ourselves from that with streaming. But it's taking a long time for the community to understand that instead of a one-day event, you could actually do a one-day event, and then your breakouts you can do on several days after that, and you can get deep into the quality. And there's this need to sort of go, look at our event, we've got you to our event, now we've got to throw 300 things to do at you, and actually you get no quality from any of them. It's important to sacrifice the serendipity attempt if you can't do it well, I think.
I'm spot on with you. I think actually at this point, it's even better just to keep serendipity events separate and keep those as short chances together, and they have a different function. And
the serendipity can be I think the serendipity can be the event. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and that's, I think, the focus of it then. But unlocking ourselves from these big pillar events and structure was a bit of a heart shock moment for many marketers in our space. We had built, and programming, and anyone talks about product development as well in the streaming space, well, that it was always like, let's showcase the concept at CES or NAB, let's have the proof of concept, then the idea, or the first customer at IBC. And it actually structured a lot of companies that I've sadly, seen, and it's a shame, they structured their product development roadmaps around these key marketing events, and it kind of made sense. We've been doing it for years. There was something comfortable about it. Now those events, just like big poles of a marquee, have pulled away, and we're like under the covers going, oh my God, we're not tied by time anymore. It's actually wonderfully liberating, but it takes for, again, this extra push earlier than many marketers were ready to go digital. And if you haven't got a digital marketing strategy, you're dead. And that's how it is now.
Yeah, I agree. A question, actually, this is sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, and from the other side of streaming media, which is an editorial property, for years we've been somewhat frustrated, and I think there's that excitement around IBC and NAB, but there's also the fact that so much energy and so many press releases, right? Come out in that 2-week period in the spring and the fall. That we've asked over the years, we've asked people, why do you do it this way? What aren't you getting lost in the shuffle? And they say, well, yeah, we are, but that's the way we've always done it, and that's the way we have to do it. So but yeah, hopefully this is waking people up to the fact that no, it's not the way you have to do it anymore.
So broad
I think there's also,
go ahead.
There's also another part of that which you mentioned, Dom, which is the idea that you watch something at an event. You might go and watch something that's not necessarily entirely what you were interested in because you were there anyway, so you might go and watch something else. Well, what's tricky with these online events is you almost have to specialize more, because if it's just a generic keynote, people will quickly start doing something else, and then you sort of lost their attention span for the rest of it. So I think the key here is to not try and replicate what you would do at a normal event. You have to sort of do it more specialized, and you have to be okay with lower viewership numbers, but people who are more engaged than they might otherwise be.
So a question to you all, really. I foresee that the event industry, Eric's business, the cinema industry, and the music concert industry are going to hit an existential crisis over the next quarter. They are in many cases going to discover ways to survive in the pandemic and allow their audiences to engage with them globally in a way that they've only been able to do in a regional, local way before, and discover new ways to build their businesses. And because the pandemic itself doesn't have a clear end point, they have to double down and commit to that. Otherwise, they're going to go out of business. But many of those, many of the outcomes of that, the digital events or whatever it may be, if they start working, they are going to cannibalize the business that they used to run when those businesses theoretically return to normal. So, for example, I think the Content Delivery Summit works better online than as a real world event. Now, doesn't mean they can't coexist, but there are, I think that cinemas, when they start realizing that they can get into premieres online and making huge ticket monies for doing effectively big live events online, when musicians get their licensing in place, which has been finally precipitated by the pandemic, and they can actually go and do gigs online without being shut down or without hitting copyright infringements, they're going to realize that they can do 7 gigs a week, every night of the week, to global audiences. That's going to be a challenge for pubs and venues and clubs and bars, because, you know, why would an artist go and get 30 quid from the pub at the end of the road when they can get 300 quid from doing a gig online from their home studio? So I think there is a real existential crisis coming for businesses which have adapted to streaming, finally accepted that it works, proven to themselves it works, and now can't capitulate without, and at the same time can't carry on without cannibalizing their prior business. So I don't know. That's my hunch. That's what I think is going to happen over the next quarter. I don't know if any of you share that view.
You had a really interesting guest last month, and I'm sorry I've forgotten her name, who was talking about the cinemas having to reinvent themselves, their bricks and mortar, you know, trying to reinvent themselves as a destination for the retail side and not just sell, what was it, Cokes and chips, that really struck with me. You know, how about making decent food in the cinema? I live in the Netherlands. We have intermissions, we have bars. It's so great, and I love that. And I miss that big time. I hear what you're saying. I think it is forcing a lot of these companies and a lot of us to rethink it. And if it gives the artists, be they musicians or you know, in the cinema, theatricals, or smaller, you know, they're thinking of all these sort of local theatrical groups and all the local live music venues and everything. If it readjusts the price point for these artists, then I think in the bigger picture, it's a great thing. But I do think that we miss this human contact. We miss being together. And I think it's going to be a long time before we all rush off and cram ourselves in a hall of 2,000 people. Maybe I'm just not the demographic that thinks like that. But so I think these smaller events, I think actually a mix will be there. And I think it will become more of a premium event, maybe to go back out there. I don't know, just a thought.
I agree that
not talk about it in such broad terms, you know, when we talk about the live music industry as a whole. I think it'll have a different impact for very large concert tours versus, you know, theater shows versus small clubs versus, you know, music festivals, things like that. They'll all be impacted differently. I, for one, can't wait until, you know, we're able to gather 2,000 people in a hall and get sweaty together. I think that's, you know, and I think I'm in the majority there. I think there's a huge, you know, desire to get back to that real, you know, human interaction and that real, you know, buzz that happens at a live show. So to Dom's point, though, I think, you know, if you have live musicians who are used to playing pubs and those pubs aren't open right now, that's a far more logical option for them than it is for a large, you know, band who isn't able to tour right now. I think they're just waiting for the scene to change and for us to get back to some sort of normalcy. Whereas, you know, I have a number of friends who are, you know, bar band musicians who have found many other ways to make money, you know, playing music online. in this landscape, and they've been quite successful at it. So yeah, I think there's a number of options out there on the smaller end of the scale than there are at the larger end, for sure.
I think it also depends a little bit on whether you're talking about. I imagine UK musicians could do that and have a global audience, but there might be countries where the language barrier, if they sing in a non-English language, they aren't able to get a global audience, and it might be trickier to do that kind of thing. I do think there'll always be a physical factor there. I think there will always be people who prefer to see it live without a screen in the middle. One of the sort of interesting things is during this last period of COVID, the national broadcaster here put out a survey of the streaming service people were using, and the sort of streaming services that we have and the one the public broadcaster has were growing, and Netflix was stagnating a little bit. Now, of course, they might have an interest in saying they're growing, but what I think it showed was that people wanted local Danish language content, and they preferred that to having like globalized content, because when you don't see people every day, having somebody who speaks the same language as you might actually be an important factor. So I think I still think there's a local element to that might make it both want to like choose people who are in the same culture as you, but also makes you want to go to a physical event, even if the online event is available.
Yeah. Cool. That was a good topic. We've done more than half this week's edition on that one. That's very good. And we've done it without Tim, which is even more amazing. I saw him briefly, but I think he's re-terminating the end of an RJ45 at the moment. So I think he'll be with us in a bit. So let's move on. We picked on the VVC licensing topic in the preamble. Guys, anyone want to pick up and update me? Because I actually haven't had a chance to read the article yet, and I'd be interested to know what's going on in the VVC licensing space. Eric, Tim, was that one of yours, or Loke? Everyone's shied away because I moved it technically.
Well, I popped it in the chat as a potential topic, but it's certainly not my area of expertise. But the short story is that the Media Coding Industry Forum has chosen 2 patent pool administrators for VVC rather than a single one. And so, now we're into the next steps of seeing how that's going to play out, who is going to be required to pay royalties. Will it be as complicated and potentially I could say
the reason I used labyrinth in those articles around H.264 was I didn't want to say cluster, but
right, exactly. And the reason I take that word out is that because fucked up has fewer characters. So, but Tim, you're a little more intimately involved with licensing issues than I am, or intimately familiar with. What are your thoughts? Are you familiar with what VVC is doing?
I am not. I mean, I haven't really paid that close attention to the licensing model there. It sounds similar in some ways to what we tried with H.265. After we had sort of all coalesced around 264, we went in sort of 2 separate directions with 265. I will say what tends to happen when you get multiple patent pools and multiple administrators is we tend to look towards large organizations, whether it's a HBO, whether it's a BBC, etc., to see where they are standardizing, and then the industry sort of ad hoc standardizes around that particular model. I mean, I think we've seen that with HLS. So VVC, EVC, clearly the industry feels that we need to move that direction. I'm still of the opinion that 264 has had enough legs to sustain the H.265 onslaught, and I suspect unless we move to 8K, we're really not going to see compelling reasons for, some of the models around VVC, especially if the licensing is uncertain. My thought will be that companies will stick with what they know with sort of standardized licensing around 264, and in a similar instance around 265. That's my take on it. And Dom, no, it wasn't an RJ45 I was connecting. It was an RJ11, because apparently I'm on the end of a phone line today as opposed to
dial-up.
Broadband. Yeah. Oh, I found an AOL CD still in the mailing envelope telling me that I needed AOL when I was going through some stuff with Michelle the other day. And I realized that apparently I hoard stuff way too much compared to the average tech person. So,
we can do the next SMAF on ICQ then.
Oh no, which is coming back surprisingly. So.
No.
I still have my 6-digit ICQ ID. That's a point of pride for me, by the way. I don't know what that says about me, but
excellent. Right. So what else have we got? Loke, you pushed forward the topic, the article about CDNs preparing for large scale events. That's very much up my street and technical. What was it that caught your eye on that subject?
Well, I think it's interesting how they prepare for large-scale events because, of course, as a broadcaster that has a number of live channels and now for sports rights, we also tend to view those as something we need to prepare for when we have a large number of concurrent users. My interest in this is that even if you have a CDN that's very capable and can put up more hardware, at some point you're going to end up in situations where you have ISPs that might have networks that can't handle it on the other end. And the challenge there is, I think, a lot of CDNs, at least in my experience, have trouble handling that relationship. So it ends up bleeding through. If you're a large broadcaster, if you have a large amount of traffic, you sort of end up in a situation where the CDN might have the capacity and you can talk to them and say, okay, actually, this is our capacity in this region, but we actually only hit this capacity. That doesn't change the fact that you might end up with especially smaller ISPs that hit either peering problems or you hit another sort of gateway that means you can't deliver to them. And I was wondering if any of you guys had sort of found a good solution to that or got a good way to manage that, because the tricky part is you're managing a relationship of networking connections between two partners that you don't really have visibility on either end, because one end is the CN and the other end is the ISP, and none of them really want to give you information about what network capacity is there. So for large events, you sort of end up in the situation of having this black box that you can't really control, and that's sort of what interested me on that topic.
I think
Mark,
from
you'd be a good person to,
from my perspective, from a live event, production and backhaul perspective and delivery perspective, it's what Brenton talks about in that article that you flagged. It's having a multi-CDN approach. And having some sort of management layer on top of those multiple CDNs. So, there are solutions out there like Deliver that will, that where you kind of give them 10% of your traffic, and in exchange, they do some very advanced load balancing across multiple CDNs and give you, analytics across those CDNs and that sort of thing. I think that's a feasible solution. My question though is like how widespread are these issues? I've been doing this for 20 years. I remember, a decade or more ago when we got, if we had a projected audience above, 500,000 viewers, then you started to kind of get squirrely. There were meetings, there were war rooms, there were people, sending up flags. These days, it's not a consideration if you're using a larger CDN like Akamai. To your point, there's certainly the ISP bottlenecks, but as far as the CDNs are concerned and their edge footprints, if you're using a very large CDN like Akamai or Limelight even, I don't see it as being a necessarily a huge issue. I think some of these larger events, I'm not sure if you read anything about the T-Mobile Bieber thing that they did on New Year's Eve, but it was a very large event in terms of audience, and it failed relatively miserably due to the ticketing layer. So they sell a ticketed experience, and the paywall failed. The access control layer failed. Basically, every part of it failed except for the live streaming itself.
It's only a key exchange. It's only a key exchange, isn't it? It's a tiny bit of data.
They didn't spin up enough VMs. Period.
Maybe the video didn't fail, Mark, because not enough people could get through the paywall.
Yeah, exactly. True. But that's the valid point. if a very large event like that is going to fail, it's typically going to be some other layer that falls down before the actual video delivery falls down. You know, so, and especially since most of the very, very large events these days are on social platforms like YouTube and such, and Twitch.
So Loke, of course, you're in the Nordics, and you talk. I came in on the tail end of the conversation about, you know, local, cultural, and that kind of thing. How big of an issue is it in Europe proper, in the Nordics, to have to deal with multiple CDNs because you're dealing with delivery to, say, France as well as Italy as well as the Nordics?
Well, for us, the challenge is actually not so much that we're delivering across the Nordics. We only you can technically watch our programs across the Nordics and across Europe, but we only really target Denmark. So it's a very small geographical area that we target with massive traffic. And I think that's a different challenge than something like if you had a pan-European event, you could go to a CDN and they usually have caches spread out and it's not a problem. I think where we hit it is something like if there's a soccer match or something national thing that everybody wants to watch. We just had a quarterfinals in handball for Denmark, where I think there's about 5.8 million people in Denmark, and I think they calculated that 2.1 of those, so about more than a third, watched the finals. That's I think where we get into these issues, because it's particularly, I think, smaller ISPs. We can do. I mean, you can do CDN switching, and I mean, we have that as well. But even then, you can still end up with an ISP that only has really one link to the outside world through some other provider. Then that link gets saturated. You have problems. But no matter how many CDNs you have in that scenario, so part of this is really, I think, also that maybe some of the ISPs haven't been great at upgrading capacity to deal with COVID and people streaming more. I don't think it's something that we've seen for a long time, but now I think we're starting to see it a little bit again. Of course, I'm not sure there is a way to mitigate that, but that's something at least we're seeing for sure.
Got it.
I hope that if it does end up that the ISPs get very singled out for their inability to scale for that type of distribution, that they're the one key holder who could actually force multicast natively into the networks. And if I ever hear of an ISP saying, "Oh, we can't keep scaling this live streaming, blah blah blah," then it just infuriates me, because it's just a bit of config on their routers. And if they do that bit of config and talk to the CDN, they will be able to take just one stream across their network and deliver it to all their subscribers. And it infuriates me when they have problems with live streaming, because they just don't want to put more caches in and so on. They're sort of sticking plaster on sticking plaster on sticking plaster, when they could just solve the problem and everyone would be happy. But anyway, yes.
Yeah,
the
I guess
button got pressed.
Part of the ISP shaming, I guess, was what Netflix aim was by publishing all their ratings for the different ISPs and how quickly they could deliver, was to be able to get to a place where they could make sure that those ISPs would upgrade the network to be able to handle the traffic. Because I can't see a reason for them to publish that doesn't involve basically getting the ISP to maybe make sure that they have a good end-to-end, good delivery to the end user from wherever Netflix delivers the content to them.
Yeah.
So I think it's count.
Vanessa, you had mentioned. Sorry, go ahead.
You've read my mind. That was just weird. I just was about to say something. Actually, that's not true. I don't know what you were going to say. Go ahead. Don't let me interrupt you.
I was going to shift to a topic you had mentioned earlier, but go ahead and finish.
Oh, okay, sure. No. It's just that I wouldn't even try to get technical, because that's just so not me. But what we had with at the beginning of COVID, and some of these smaller streaming services, right, that might not have built the capacity and scoped out peak traffic, probably like the bigger players, right? So, really niche content. So I'm going back to my lovely Broadway HD former clients, and they had a celebrity whose now name completely escapes me, put up on his Facebook and social channels to say, "Hey, let's do a watch party around Oklahoma tonight at da-da-da." And this huge peak demand around one time for this one program, and the app just was like, what do I do? Now, frantically, people were trying to fix it, and they did fix it, but there was no way in a million years that they could have ever anticipated that, one of these influencers, had kicked in and said, hey, I'm just going to do this. I'm stuck at home anyway. And what was an accident turned into then a marketing technique that I think has now been quite widely adopted and allowed, then obviously the channels or the streamers to say, oh, look, we're going to do a watch together or a watch party and team up with Facebook and do this. Or they're even building out the tech into their apps directly, of course, so we don't lose people. But that was quite an interesting scenario, and we realized that it was just such a different ball game. So just one scenario from the user experience perspective.
So the question I had is actually fairly connected to it, but it's less the technical question and more a question around programming decisions. So you mentioned the event out of Dubai, I think this weekend with the DJ.
David Guetta.
Yeah, David Guetta. And because we're now talking about global events, how do we decide what to step on in terms of prime time? Because, somebody might want to watch The Only Way is Essex, but it's on TV at the same time that this is happening as a stream. In the old days, especially when it was geographical or small, or to Loki's point about the handball finals, when it's geographically small, you can essentially balance out what's going to go on prime time versus what's not. Now we're talking about, first of all, what time do we set it at? If it's coming out of Dubai, the live event needs to be at a time that people can attend. But on the flip side, you want people at home in the UK and in the US and in Singapore to be able to watch it. Is there discussion about that kind of thing and deciding what day it goes on and what time it goes on?
Yeah, and I think we learned a lot from the sports world, right? Where we've got football games going on through the middle of the night just so that the primetime audiences can watch it. And I really, really, my heart goes out to those players. I mean, they get paid enough, but still, that is really harsh, right? Especially time and time again. And we've been watching all the NBA. I finally buckled and got my son an NBA pass because he's just got hooked on basketball during lockdown. And, there's some of this stuff that's, he's getting up early or late for when he's allowed to. But aside from that, the David Guetta one is actually a really interesting one because normally we would air it live on the Saturday and then rerun it at the same time on the Sunday. We don't have a full catalogue for every single hour. And we would, rerun and rotate the prime programming, of course, so that we could appease people, because at the moment it's at, I think, 3 p.m. in the afternoon CET to accommodate the Dubai evening time, when of course it's dark and we've got lasers and fireworks and all that stuff and a helipad and oh god, but we can't do it on Sunday because of the Super Bowl. So there are huge global events that are fundamental, right? Again, we would talk about if they're going ahead, and we're idiots to try and program against it. But I also think that when we are taking stuff out that's this globally, we have to we can't keep everybody happy all the time, and we'll have to balance that up. But what I would say is that the programming, the really good stuff, gets a high enough rotation and frequency that we hopefully can find a time where people can do that. And I see how our scheduling team are doing all these great ways of doing it and proven ways of doing it. And where we're in situations where we've got our own VOD services, obviously that stuff's on demand as well. So I don't think there's a rule from it, but I do think we can look at the sports world, which has always been a whole different ballgame, literally placed in itself, that, we can take a lot of learnings from that.
And maybe even from movie theaters, because if you think about the way movie theaters do, you've got blockbusters that some distribution will say, we're going to stay out of the way of that. And others will say, we're going to do alternate programming because we think a rom-com will do really well against an action flick. If somebody doesn't want to go see the action movie, they'll go see the so.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think, maybe David Guetta isn't, competitive programming to the Super Bowl. I think there's certainly a crossover. There's the middle of that Gantt chart, but I feel like, I'm sorry, Venn diagram Gantt chart. But I think you could, program one against the other and not lose much of your audience. I think if I can make another point, I think it's also important to define what we mean by live. So, in terms of sports, obviously that needs to be live in most circumstances. People want to watch it live. They don't want to be behind the curve in terms of, knowing who won the match. But I'll use the Tomorrowland Festival, for example. So they're one of the few, global electronic music festivals last year that were really able to put on a successful event. But the event wasn't live. I think it was live in one time zone. It was live in CET, right? And then everything else was programmed per time zone. So the live portion of it, the togetherness portion of it, you were together with people within your time zone watching this content. It was all canned content at that point, but you were watching it live with people in your time zone. So, I think that's another option for sure in terms of, programming these global events. You just, it's just not live for most people.
No, it is. And again, we're doing a repackage of that over Valentine's weekend. That's an old programming trick, repackaging stuff. Of course, you all know this really, really well. But it's again to create that we're together feeling, and that whole thing as an opportunity to also repackage that content down to only 5 hours. So it's a bit of a marathon. It's got a mini festival feel. So there are some creative things coming out.
It's the length of 2 Hallmark movies, essentially. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, guys. I'm going to step in because we've got about 3-4 minutes left, and it's always good to end the show with a little exploration of what you guys are expecting to be doing over the next month. Just before we sidetrack into that, actually, it's important to notify you all that I think it's our month off next month. It's March. And in March, we let the ladies take over because it's International Women's Day, a couple of days either side of SMAF. So Peggy will be here with many of the women in streaming media crowd, and we will be taking a month off. Well, I'll probably be lurking in the background to press a few buttons, but you won't see my face, and you won't see any of the rest of us. But so really, I should ask you guys what we're up to over the next couple of months. But let's start with the guests. Vanessa, what do you got planned over the next few weeks?
Oh God, I really wish you'd put me last. I had to sort of think,
okay,
what am I doing the next couple? No. I'm desperately trying to, obviously still going to handle the job and recruit. So I'm trying to find the ultimate digital marketing person and the ultimate product marketing person. But aside from that, I think actually what we are looking at is some new exciting co-productions that we're doing with people like ESPN and Red Bull and others. And so bringing those to market. So those are going to keep me busy because they're all completely different topics and all very exciting.
Perfect. Eric, I'm just going to go look randomly along the row here. You're presumably still programming and busy with Streaming Connect.
Yeah, exactly. I will be doing nothing but Zoom meetings here in this chair for the next 3 weeks. So
I know you will be editing my article on the new music license, hopefully.
Will it be shorter than the Facebook post?
I don't know. I don't know how I churned out 8,000 words trying to phrase my article. That was insane. Do find that on Facebook if you're interested. Tim, how about you?
Main focus, obviously Stream Media Connect, and then the next survey that we're doing, which is a throwback to a survey we did a couple years ago around OTT and VOD. So it'll be interesting to see there.
Perfect. And Mark, how about you? You must have some big events that you're organizing. How about the Super Bowl? You must be.
No Super Bowl this year because I don't have any ties to CBS, but we are doing a Marvel event this month, which is the first live event we've done for Marvel since 2019. So things are starting to come back slowly but surely. Hopefully at this point we'll do some red carpets for them this year, that sort of thing. A bunch of corporate events and some other large scale stuff for Fortune 10 tech companies that I can't talk about, but and raising a couple babies.
Cool, good. And Loke, how about you?
Yeah, so we just got a new strategy announced internally that actually also externally. It's a press release as well that we want to grow from 700,000 subscribers to 1.3 million. So I guess my plan would be making sure that we can actually scale to that slightly larger amount within the next 4 years.
Awesome, cool. Well, I will carry on geeking out and gathering. My weather satellite station is now improving and improving, so I'm passing the time with that. We've upgraded platform from an old little Raspberry Pi to the new Pi 400, which I'm proudly displaying. It looks like a keyboard. It's not very exciting, and we're being a bit rushed off our feet after the CDN we rolled out for Limelight. So anyone needs CDN services, we are now officially open for sales and business after a quiet year re-engineering some stuff. So do get in touch. A little bit of self-promotion there. I got told I was being shy with our marketing the other day, so have to get the plugs in while we can. So do get in touch, and if you want to get on, we're starting to program the second half of the year on SMAF, so always interested to hear from potential guests like Loki, who we grabbed out of the chat room, and I'm going to nail Kurum, who's been lurking through the last few editions as well, and get him on a bit later in the year. But do reach out if you want to. We've got a new app which will pull down all the editions. It also pulls all the news into it and has our little friendly bot that reads the news to you as well, so you can listen to your streaming news while you drive your car between your garage and your home office. But I think with that, I'm going to press the one button which will end the stream, and we won't see you next month, because of course Peggy will be here with the Women in Streaming Media Group, but we will see you in April. Thank you for coming, and see you soon.